Chapter 12, Apes, going to deal with something called sustaining biodiversity, the species approach. Basically going to take a look at endangered and threatened species about it. Case study, the passenger pigeon, once a very numerous bird on the earth, used to fly in the sky, used to be so populated that it used to darken out the sun. Then what happened was it became a big business in the mid-1800s. The bones were used as fertilizers, the meat was good to eat, the feathers were used for things like pillows and comforters, and it was greatly overharvested. The techniques that they used were terrible. They used things like burning sulfur to get them out of trees. They basically died and dropped down. They actually would use they'd sew their eyes shut and tie strings to their legs and kind of let them fly around as bait. And then what would happen is they'd bring other birds in and then they'd mass shoot those things. By 1900, it actually became extinct. The last known one was shot. The last known wild one was shot in Ohio in 1900 by a boy, and then there was one kept alive in a zoo for a couple more years or several more years in Ohio, and then of course that one died too. So now they have the last one stuffed in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So a classic example of us ruining. Human activities are destroying and degrading biodiversity. We know human activity has disturbed at least half of the Earth's land surface since we got here. It's filled in wetlands. We've converted grasslands and forests to crop fields and urban areas. Remember, as our population is going up, we are taking more of these natural resources, and we've degraded biodiversity. A couple ways of looking at extinction. There's local extinction. That's when a species disappears from an area it once inhabited. It may be found elsewhere, but that is not a good sign. Ecological is the number of species are so low they cannot fulfill their ecological roles. Their ecological roles, for example, with alligators may be, what alligators tend to do is dig these big holes to burrow in the swampy areas that they live, and then they'll abandon them. Then other species will come in and take them, kind of a foundation type species. Biological is the species has disappeared from the earth, though. So that's the extinction you've probably heard about. The reality with extinction is we know extinction takes place within species. Of course, eventually humans will become extinct too. It's a natural process. There's two ways of looking at extinction. Background extinction is when there's a normal rate minus the human influence. So it's very slow. So humans don't influence this at all. Could be millions of years for a species to become extinct. Mass extinction is when large groups of species are wiped out over millions of years. And that occurs across our planet. Classical example is the dinosaurs. All the dinosaurs became extinct at one time, about 65 million years ago. Not exactly what sure caused it, but there's certainly some human activities cause premature extinctions, of course. Conservative estimates of extinction are we are causing anywhere from 0.01 to 1% extinction. That's a lot when you think about the number of species that are on the planet. The growth of the human population does increase this loss, of course, in regions like tropical rainforests, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries. That's where a lot of speciation occurs, and they're being destroyed. Speciation occurs in these regions because they're excellent habitat, have lots of resources for them to grow from the species. Estimating extinction rate, really not that easy to do. The problem is it's really hard to document due to the length of time. Again, it takes millions of years to occur. We've been really thinking about this for maybe 200 years tops. So that's a very little small blip in the grand scheme of things. Only about 1.8 million species are identified. There may be another 500,000 species out there, particularly in rainforests, particularly things like insects, that we don't even know about yet. Little is known about the nature and ecological roles of species identified too, so we don't know exactly what they do for us. Endangered and threatened species, it's kind of what's deemed an ecological smoke alarm. In other words, we need to realize that we're doing harm and we need to fix that. Two ways of looking at these. Let's start at the bottom. Threatened species, still abundant in its natural range, but it's likely to become endangered in the near future. So its population's going down. Maybe we humans see that habitat destruction is occurring in their area, and due to past history, it might be wiped out. Endangered species are so few individual survivors that it could become extinct soon. The first ones that tend to go are those that are big and tasty and those with valuable parts. The sea bass right now, a very tasty Fish, well, what happens is we're harvesting it so much it may be gone in no time. Take a look at the picture up at the front, the grizzly bear. Grizzly bears are oftentimes shot for their prize, for people that use their hides. The Florida manatee, which is the one on the right side, that's oftentimes down in Florida hit with boats, and their props actually kill those because they have to come to the surface to breathe. African elephant has been devastated over time because of their ivory tusks. So what makes some species prone to extinction? Well, they have a low reproductive rate. The elephant is a classic example, or the giraffe is a classic example, which has probably near 2-year gestation period for offspring. And I know giraffes oftentimes, or rather elephants oftentimes, don't even have their first child until they're about 10 years old, or not child, offspring I should say. Those are case-selected species. They need large territory, so they're roaming. Bears are a great example. Black bears, grizzly bears, they need a large territory, and that territory oftentimes is destroyed, limiting them. They tend to be the top of the food chain. They're tertiary consumers, so what happens is if food below them is wiped out, of course they're going to be naturally wiped out too. Generally, they have a specialized niche. The flamingos of Florida, if hurricane comes in, wipes out the shrimp population, for some example, which is what they eat, boom, they're done. And of course, the other thing is they may be narrowly distributed, and if that area again is wiped out, they're done. Global extinction, here are some creatures that are gone. Passenger pigeon, great auk, dodo, dusky seaside sparrow, and the epicornis, which is native to Madagascar, gone. Some animals have become prematurely extinct because of human activities, generally because of that. Here are some animals again that are threatened or endangered. You can see the grizzly bear at the top, white top pitcher plant, African elephant, these are more we'll talk about later, the Siberian tiger, gorgeous creature, the golden lion, humpback chub, the swallowtail butterfly, and Mojave Desert tortoise, which is a couple more here too. Salamanders, giant panda, of course, because of its low reproductive rate and a very specialized creature. Blue whale, hawksbill sea turtle, swamp pink plant, pine barrens tree frog, the male in particular, and the mountain gorillas of Africa. A couple more. Florida manatee, of course. Gray wolf, we'll talk about a little bit more in class. Florida panther, prairie dogs. Prairie dogs are being killed because the ranchers don't like them out there, and because their cattle step in their holes and of course break their legs, and then they have to destroy the cattle. A whole bunch of other things here too. California condor, black rhinoceros in Africa has taken a hit too. They're killed oftentimes because their horn actually is ground up as a medicinal, for medicinal reasons, and it's really in a second. How do we keep track of all this stuff? There is something called the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, also known as the IUCN. It publishes an annual what's called Red List, and you can look this up on the internet. And we will, listing the world's threatened species. The 2004 Red List, which is way outdated, contains almost 16,000 species at risk for extinction. That is terrible. Real important fact, the one on the bottom, when an area decreases by 90%, so we do habitat destruction by 90% in an area, about 50% of the species in those areas will local extinction, but still. So why do we really care? Well, instrumental value, we could be getting medicines from these animals or these plants. Remember that things like cancer, the cure may be out there. We just need to find it. Now, let's not destroy it. Ecotourism, of course, a lot of nations like Kenya, South Africa, rely on ecotourism, so let's save those animals. Let's not destroy them. And of course, they may have genetic information which can help tie us to the past. Non-use value, so really just the idea that it's nice that they're there. Existence value, hey, it's nice, aesthetic, they're pretty. Bequest value, again, it's nice to know they're there, we like that. The reality is, though, we have things like poaching. A male lion's skin can be worth up to $1,000, and there's this huge black market for this stuff. A male lion living for 7 years could produce about $515,000 in tourism. So let's save that thing. It's worth a heck of a lot more if we can get tourists, people like us that like to go over to other nations and actually see them more. Rhinoceroses often killed for their horns and sold illegally on the black market for decorative and medicinal purposes. Terrible. You can see the picture on that. The animal shot, and they simply take the horns, and that's it, and leave the rest lay. A live gorilla is known to get about $150,000. A panda pelt about $100,000. Chimpanzee about $50,000. And a rhino horn, you can actually get $13,000 per pound, and that's why they're being killed. So there is some promising thing. We can actually use DNA to reduce illegal killing of elephants. So they can actually, if we find ivory on the black market, we can actually DNA test that and figure out exactly where they came from based on the ones that have died. Of course, that's very labor and technology intensive. In the 80s, elephant poaching was at an all-time high, and their population really took a hit. In 1989, then international treaty against poaching elephants. Poaching was on the rise, as I said, and we can track that area of poaching through DNA analysis of elephants. Elephants, the other side of this is they do damage areas of South Africa. Should they be killed? That's kind of there. Another little case study is with the bat. We know bats are vulnerable to extinction. We don't like bats. We are scared of bats for some reason. Of course, they can spread rabies, which is a huge threat. Problem is they're very slow to reproduce. They are a case-selected species. And human destruction of habitats is really wreaking havoc on this thing. And the problem is they're very important ecological roles. Like they feed on crops. They damage, or they feed on crop damaging nocturnal insects rather. So in other words, those bugs that are killing our crops, they're actually a natural biological means of getting rid of them. They're pollinators, so what they'll do is they'll spread pollen from plant to plant to plant, which is excellent in cross-fertilization for species genetic diversity. They are fruit eaters, so what they do is they'll eat some fruit and then they'll actually help disperse their seed down the road, so they help plants quite a bit. And of course we have that unwarranted fear. So that's why we really should care about bats and really not destroy them. That's it for the first part.